This podcast deals with disturbing subject matter. Listener discretion and headphones are advised. It's time to open the door to your mind. Sit back and listen to true horror. But be careful of what you allow in. Because it's time to go through the fog.
I'm DarkHero, and this story's called Knock Knock Knock.
Last year, I moved into a new place with a couple of friends of mine. The three of us, splitting the rent, were able to afford this old house. Everything was normal the entire time we lived there until October came around. We were in our rooms at around 12 a.m. when we heard a loud knocking coming from the front door. We barely heard it at first. It was so faint. We ignored it, thinking that it was just a noise from the street. Then it started getting louder and louder and louder until it felt as if the walls were shaking. Underneath the knocks, you could hear a child sobbing. We rushed towards the noise, using our hands to shield our ears. The knocking was so violent that we thought we'd find our front door in splinters. I pressed an eye to the door's peephole, and my heart sank as I saw absolute silence. I took a step back. "Stop! What do you want?" I shouted, but my words were drowned out. The child's crying turned into screams, and that's when my friend stepped over. His hand gripped around the doorknob and yanked it open. Silence. My other friend flipped the porch lights on to look around, but there was nothing at all. They cursed to themselves as they came back inside, brushing it off as some sort of prank. My friends returned to their rooms, but I stood there for a moment longer. The following night, I was home alone while my friends were out having a few drinks. I was in my room catching up on some shows when the knocking could be heard. I quickly got to my feet and ran towards the front door. Again, the knocking was getting louder. At each knock, the door shook on its hinges. A young child was wailing from outside, and I grabbed the door handle, my hands aching while grasping the knob, and I slowly turned it. Once again, as soon as the door was opened, there was absolutely nothing. Days went by, and with each one that passed, it happened again. Every day, at 12 a.m., that damn knocking would fill our home, followed by that child's cry. We no longer thought of it as a prank. One of the guys refused to be home at night, while the other tried his best to ignore it. I was designated to be the one to deal with it, as it seemed like the noise wouldn't stop until the door opened. Each night, I would call out. It seemed that the child, or whatever was making the noise, was in trouble. Every night, I would open the door to nothing. We tried our best to just deal with the situation, but with each day, I felt myself being worn down. And I asked our landlord if he knew anything about it, but he never responded to our calls. That's when I decided to do some research of my own. I typed down my address, and the first thing that popped up was an article. Local boy murdered at doorstep. I felt the blood drain from my face as I read about a boy who was being harassed by an older man. Halloween night, the man slowly stalked him home. Unfortunately, the boy forgot the key to get inside, and he noticed the man creeping towards him. He began to frantically knock on the door. Unfortunately, his parents were at a party, and as midnight came, the man sunk his knife into the poor boy. wanted to vomit. But I quickly texted my friends the article. They couldn't believe what they read. We debated on breaking the lease and leaving that house, but we couldn't afford to do that. We hoped that once October finished, it would all be over. The 31st came, and my friends refused to stay home. They asked me to go out with them, but something in my gut prevented me from leaving. And a few minutes before midnight, I set up a chair near the front door and sat there, waiting. As it always did, the door shook with violent knocks. My chest tightened. I didn't want the boy to be left alone to his fate, and I jolted forward and swung the door open. The knocking stopped, but the sobbing continued. I looked down to see the shape of a young child, dressed up like a scarecrow, rubbing the tears away from his eyes. He looked up at me, and I gasped to see that he had no face, just an empty mass of flesh on his head. The boy clutched to my waist, and I assured him that things were okay. I thought that things were fine until I saw what was behind him. On the end of the walkway that led to the front door was a large silhouette of a man. I could hear heavy, excited breathing coming from the shadow of the man. The man took a step forward, and it made a loud thud. I stood there, stunned, as he took slow and deliberate, heavy steps to us. That's when I noticed that in his hand, revealed by the faint glow of the moon, was a hunting knife. He moved faster. Each booming step toward us, I forced my leg to move as I pulled the boy inside the house and slammed the door. The boy's crying was muffled as he held me tight, then a loud at my back. Silence. I looked down to see that the boy was gone, and I was left in a calming silence.